Composing Gloves here, and you have made it through the expectations, what the series is about, and you've made it through the vision video. Now, we need to give you some background on the history. This is going to be a brief overview. I've done a ton of reading, as much research as I possibly can. Well, that's obviously not true. I could do more, but I've done enough to where I consider it to be enough. And I'm going to share with you sort of a rundown version of that and your ability to link this, because I'm going to give you a bunch of things to listen to sort of prep you for the production, and your ability to link this information and the culture to it will give you a way better sense of why it became a thing, why it's a thing, and your ability to I think that your ability to make the genre will improve if you understand the history. And it's just interesting to begin with. So, okay, rewind all the way back to 1980 and 1990 when we had the rave scene going on. That was that was a thing, like the raves, and the UK. So we're hanging out in the UK and all this stuff's going down. I have some notes here, so if I look down, it's just to keep me on track. It's just a brief little notes. Okay, so we're at the rave scene, and this thing called hardcore emerges, similar to hardstyle. It is you have this big crazy kick, like down, like this enormous kick, and there are tons of that's pretty much what it is. Big crazy kick combined with break beats. In some form or another, get put in there. What is a break beat? Well, if you just think of a drummer playing a break and then speed it up, and that's the other thing. At the end of at the early 1990s, they were taking these break beats that they would sample from other people's records, and they would speed it up like a ton. And because they didn't have the DAWs like we do now, think about it, we have all these great tools available to ourselves to make stuff. That stuff didn't exist back then. So its origins, the method of production was really different, and sampling was a big thing. And so you would take these breaks and speed them up, and then you pick a crazy kick, and you get crazy. Well, that eventually turned into jungle. What became jungle? Hardcore itself was more rave than it was break beats, but occasionally you'd find it mixed. There's a whole thing about the Amen Break too that you should totally check out. Just look up Amen Break. There are documentaries on it because it's the most famous 6-second drum loop ever. That's just the most famous one. You've heard it. I'm pretty much going to guarantee it, but it's a universal claim. So someone somewhere hasn't heard that break, but you've pretty much heard that break. So once we get to hardcore breaks down what happens with hardcore, because there's this whole cultural thing happening at the same time. So all these, it was crazy, dude. People would meet and they would have these enormous raves, and they'd take ecstasy so they could keep dancing. They would literally just keep taking this ecstasy, which if for some reason you don't know what ecstasy is, it's a drug, and you take it, and they would take this thing to keep them awake so they could keep dancing. The motto was pretty much dance till you drop. And they took that very literally. You just kept dancing until you literally could not dance anymore. Once you were on the floor, then literally passed out, then you were done dancing. And obviously cops, this wasn't legal, and the way they organized these things and some of the things that happened at these places were getting out of hand. However, the scene was really strong, this hardcore scene. So what would happen is that they would organize secret raves, and they would get together a couple hours before the event, 4 hours or whatever, and they would pass along this key information, and they'd have all these ways of distributing this information, and they would all show up. They'd set the whole thing up in some secret location, secret warehouse or whatever, and they'd go nuts. And if they could get it started before the cops showed up, the cops pretty much couldn't shut it down. And so the cops had to get smarter about just preventing it in the first place. So they started setting up blockades. They had better inside men. They did all these things. And what ended up happening was they didn't realize, though, that some of these kids were freaking nuts. They would do anything to get to these raves. It was rebellion against the man. And so someone somewhere along the line ended up getting shot as they attempted to get to the rave. And I think they even died. I don't remember the details. It was something happened, though. I'm pretty sure they died. Someone who knows, just drop it in the comments. There's a little fact. So dying's a big fact. I'm sorry for that person. But anyways, something happened where someone either got shot or they died, whatever the heck that means. And the scene became very, very unpopular. People were not willing to risk their lives for the music, which I think is a fair way to rate your priorities. I'd rather be alive so I can listen to more music than go to a rave and die trying to get there. So that became unpopular, but jungle began to emerge. And so jungle used the break beat. That became a thing. And then we're going to speed up this part here because I feel that's really, once you get into jungle, you've pretty much accomplished drum and bass to a degree. So they were speeding up their music, got sped up. This crazy thing happened, so it made that genre less popular, and jungle started becoming a thing. An underground scene began to occur immediately, though, and these people were like diehard fans, keeping the music alive, and so that was like a whole nother thing. They got more and more experimental. That's another huge thing. They started, the rules went out the door. Who cared about form? Like, they didn't care about form. Who cared about, like, the sound design? They didn't care about sound design. They just wanted something that made their bodies move. That was the end goal. And make them move freaking fast. Like, that was the other end goal. So a lot of DJs headed up this style. And sometimes the producer name is a DJ. So it became a thing because there was a lot of sampling. So you'd mix records to create an endlessly looping. That was sort of where it began, is you got a break, and they noticed that when this break happened in a tune, that everyone would go crazy. So like, hey, if I get a record with break A and then I get another record with break B, I can loop break A, and then once break A is over, I can loop break B, and I could go back. And then if you mess with the tempo, you do all these things, you could create a break, an endlessly looping break at outrageously fast tempos to ideally keep the high of the dancers. Like, everyone's just going crazy. Listen, any drum and bass, that's ideally what's going on, depending on the genre, the subgenre of drum and bass. Okay, so that was a thing. After that, man, it's just a lot of information. I didn't realize how much reading you don't realize how much reading you do or explain or any of this stuff until you try to explain it to someone in one shot. Okay, so that happens. We get this thing called Jungle Techno. And that was also in the development. Both these things were in the development of the rave scene, which contributed to the cops getting there, because people went for these new styles of music as well. And so jungle did sort of decline a little bit. Like, it's a fuzzy line because it's a cultural movement. So you can't just say like, oh, someone died, so the entire genre declined. Like, you can't make claims like that. But there certainly was like an effect, especially as it got publicized. So these genres began to emerge. Jungle techno, which just mixed more elements of techno, more of the pounding, and the break got mixed in there. The break's the big thing. Breaks just became so big. There were people in other countries that were paying people in like another country. I don't have the countries memorized, but there was like literally transactions where they're like, hey, send us more breaks. And so this person would sample records on breaks and literally just send them records full of breaks. And there were CDs that eventually just became a standard thing, that if you were a DJ, you bought this set of CDs. I think they were big breaks CDs. It was something like that. And you would use these things to make your stuff. And so it was a thing. So it turned into jungle techno. The ecstasy thing sort of died out because of the insaneness of what was going on. Like, who in the right mind dances till they freaking almost die? Like, that's kind of crazy. It's a little extreme. So like, chill out. So, okay. Hard step and tech step became a thing, which were they just incorporated different elements of like hard style. That became a thing with more of sort of the crazier bass lines, like super big bass lines with the drums were becoming more and more popular. Tech step was more of a sci-fi culture movement product. So you wanted it to sound futuristic, what futuristic was considered then. I feel like most people have a pretty good idea. Just watch some like old Star Wars movies and some old Star Trek stuff and like take that and try and make it into music. And that's pretty much there, and then mix it with all this old stuff that's been hanging around, like drum and bass, or at this point jungle techno, all this stuff. At this point, when you mix tech step in there, you pretty much have drum and bass to a lesser extent. Speed garage happened, which was sort of a transitionary phase into liquid funk, which is just some people just call it liquid drum and bass. They leave the funk part out, and that has a lot more pop culture reference. The speed garage was also instrumental. I believe this is where some of the rock was introduced, because I'm a big fan of the drum and bass that I listen to quite a bit, or I've heard a lot of, is mostly the stuff that has been mixed pretty heavily with rock influence. A lot of Pendulum and The Chemists and things like that have rock more. You could tell that there's definitely a rock influence. And if you look in the background of the artist, it's kind of interesting to learn about them. We're not going to go that far though. Like, that's too far for production. But anyways, you see it. This is this huge thing just sort of came streaming down the pop culture line. It's still underground at this point, but once it went to liquid funk, we've pretty much reached what you would consider modern drum and bass, because it sounds like pop liquid instead of funk liquid. Like, it didn't sound very funky. And there were things where reggae got involved, and I don't actually have that on here, but reggae was involved in the development of this quite a bit too, because, you know, they're all about them breaks, dude. And they would speed up their stuff. And so there's all these subgenres sort of came out of different cultures. Like, there is Brazilian drum and bass. Some call it samba bass, like the samba, only with bass. Yeah, I don't know. If you look up samba bass, you're not going to find very much. But if you look up Brazilian drum and bass, you're going to find tons. So that's pretty much the arrival at what we know today as drum and bass. As production techniques came around, that's where my notes in too. As production techniques came around, though, we started getting a new sort of this newer stuff that could be considered more funk drum and bass stuff, like Noisia. And now if you know about them, they freaking go crazy with the samples. Like, their mixing and everything is just insane. And that's one reason why they were so popular, is they were using this new technology, so their stuff was really clear. It was just super clear, because you could do things that were just like like they weren't even capable of dreaming up some of it back then, because they simply didn't know that could even exist as a thing. So yeah, if you have any questions about this, let me know. Do you have, list some of the history down below? Like, what did you like about it? Is your favorite maybe line in this spiel? Did I get anything wrong? Drop that down below. You know, fix it up. If you want to define a couple terms for people that you feel like might not know what things are, you could do that. Like, help each other out. Let's get something cool here. I thought the history was really cool. I really tried to look up some stuff. If you have like a resource, cool drum and bass website that has it, or a cool documentary on YouTube, or a Reddit page that was really good at explaining some of the stuff, you know, drop those down there. Those are useful resources. I don't want this to be like a stagnant, like, watch me rant about the history. I wouldn't consider this a rant. I'm not really hating on anything. I'm just telling you kind of what happened. So that's as far as my knowledge really goes on term. There's a lot more that happens in between, but I just feel like you get the general idea is how these genres progress into it. The introduction of breaks at Jungle was like the most significant thing that happens. The Amen break was like that. Was the 60 record. And I guess we should cover that just a little bit more. The Amen break. So this band, I think they were called the Allman Brothers, like Amen, but I pronounce it Amen. Most people do. I don't know what the deal is about that. But anyways, they have this, they're going along, and then they play it. Think of Powerpuff Girls. If you've ever watched Powerpuff Girls, like growing up, I think of Powerpuff Girls immediately. Most people comment that down there. But then you start realizing that this thing is literally freaking everywhere. And so most people attribute, whenever you're playing a break, oh, that's the Amen break, just because it sounds like a break. And it's like, nah, there's like literally a ton of other breaks that people use. You're just freaking brainwashed. So people will make this break out to be like the break of breaks. It kind of is as far as a first break, but like, chill out. There's other breaks. Again, you have any questions, let me know. I'll try the best to answer them. Subscribe and have a blessed day. A simple thing. So this is what I got. And if we play a low note, so put a low note down here. This is what it sounds like. And if we play a mid note, and if we play a high note, we really get the metal feel. I'm not going to play much higher than that, because any higher than that, it can...